London, 1997. The world stood still as news of Diana's death echoed through rain-soaked streets. Outside Kensington Palace, thousands wept, clutching roses against cold iron gates. Yet inside Clarence House, a different storm brewed. Prince Charles sat before a muted television, the headlines already framing him as the villain, the heartless husband, the man who drove the people's princess into loneliness. His advisors whispered of public fury, of monarchy in peril. Cameras circled like vultures. Charles knew the truth no longer mattered, only perception did. That night, amid the flicker of candlelight and clinking glasses of scotch, he made a phone call that would change everything. The call wasn't to comfort his sons. It was to an editor, and the message was simple. Let's keep this quiet. By morning, every major paper in Britain had rewritten its tone. The venom softened. The headlines turned from accusation to tragedy. Somewhere between grief and guilt, an unspoken understanding had formed. Charles's aides moved swiftly, offering access. Exclusive photos of the princes, quotes of sorrow, controlled interviews. The tabloids got their stories. Charles got silence. Behind the walls of Balmoral, whispers grew that a gentleman's agreement now protected the heir from humiliation. But the price of that protection was steep, truth itself. In the wake of tragedy, the monarchy's survival instincts ignited. Meetings were held behind closed oak doors, every discussion circling one question: how to humanize Charles. The palace PR chief proposed a new narrative. The grieving father, misunderstood yet devoted. It was a delicate balance, mourning without appearing manipulative, contrition without confession. When a top editor requested a private briefing, Charles hesitated, but within hours he agreed. The press wanted redemption stories, and the palace was willing to supply them, one exclusive at a time. As autumn settled over Britain, the deal began to take shape. The press received unprecedented access: private photographs, glimpses of fatherhood, calculated displays of grief. In return, coverage softened. The tabloids that once hunted him now shielded him, erasing stories of bitterness and betrayal. For the first time in years, Charles smiled for the cameras without fear. But every smile came at a cost. Somewhere deep within, he knew that this fragile alliance wasn't built on loyalty, but leverage. The nation began to heal, or so it seemed. Yet whispers persisted in Fleet Street's backrooms that Charles had promised something greater: financial favors, access to palace gossip, and early scoops on royal events, each traded like currency. The monarchy's relationship with the press transformed from adversarial to transactional. Charles' reputation rose quietly, his guilt blurred beneath layers of orchestrated compassion. But in the silence of his study, the phone still haunted him, for the call that saved him also bound him to secrets that could never be spoken. Months after Diana's funeral, the public mood began to shift. The nation still grieved, but grief was softening into nostalgia, and Charles' aides seized the moment. Leaks were choreographed, stories carefully crafted. A father's quiet redemption. One headline read, words penned by a tabloid editor who only weeks earlier had called him a monster. The change was no miracle. It was management. In exchange for access to the prince's private outings and photos from Balmoral, certain newspapers agreed to bury less flattering reports. Affairs, anger, resentment. Charles, once a pariah, was now becoming palatable. But in the newsroom corridors of Fleet Street, every favor carried a price. Camilla was the final problem. The public despised her, the woman blamed for Diana's unhappiness. But the Press Alliance offered a solution, one image at a time. The palace fed subtle stories. The steadfast companion, Charles's rock in his darkest hour. Carefully framed photographs began to surface. Camilla in gardens, attending charity events, always gentle, never intrusive. Each headline softened the edges of her scandal. What the world didn't know was that this redemption had been pre-negotiated in secret lunches between royal aides and media barons. Forgiveness was being printed by the pound. Behind the veneer of control, resentment simmered among other royals. The Queen's courtiers viewed the arrangement as dangerous, an erosion of dignity for convenience. "We do not negotiate with the press," one senior aide warned. But Charles' circle disagreed. They saw survival in manipulation. Meetings grew tense. Voices were raised behind Balmoral's heavy doors. The Queen remained outwardly calm but privately furious, watching as her son bartered royal silence for sympathy. The monarchy's unity was cracking, not from public scandal, but from its secret cure. The deal grew legs. Soon, tabloids not only cooperated, they anticipated. They shielded Charles from scandal, redirected public ire, and even defended him in opinion columns. In return, their editors received coveted invitations, charity galas, royal briefings, access to photo ops no journalist could dream of. The palace's relationship with the press had transformed into a shadow partnership, one where truth bent easily to favor. And yet, beneath it all, guilt lingered. For every flattering story printed, one truth was buried, one voice silenced. Even Charles began to wonder if his redemption had come at too high a cost. Late one winter night, the first threat arrived. A journalist from an independent paper called, hinting he had evidence, memos, meeting notes, even payment receipts tied to the secret deal. Panic spread among Charles's aides. Phones were wiped, documents shredded. One senior staffer vanished quietly from his position within days. The story never broke, but among the royal staff, the whisper spread. Someone out there knew the pact that had once shielded the prince now became his greatest liability. By 2000, the British press had changed, but not as Charles intended. What began as an alliance of silence was turning into a weapon. Editors competed for royal favor, printing half-truths wrapped as exclusives. Every gesture, every photograph, was bartered behind closed doors. Camilla's slow rehabilitation had divided the nation. Letters poured into Buckingham Palace. Some sympathetic, others venomous. But the real danger came from within. A former palace aide, dismissed quietly months before, began whispering to journalists. He spoke of arrangements, of late-night meetings, and sealed envelopes. The press smelled blood, not of Diana's memory this time, but of the deal that had followed her. In Fleet Street, alliances shifted overnight. The same editors who once toasted Charles now smelled opportunity. Among them, one name rose: Richard Hale. The man who had first agreed to the pact had grown restless. His paper needed a scandal, and nothing sold like royal secrets. When Hale began asking questions, subtle warnings followed. Missing invitations, silent phone lines. But Hale didn't care. If the palace wants silence, he told a reporter, that silence must be paid for. It was the moment the shield began to crack. From greed, not guilt. The Queen's patience was nearing its end. Reports of backdoor dealings reached her private desk. "We do not trade in reputation," she told her staff, voice cold as steel. But Charles could not unwind what had already begun. Camilla's image was tied to the deal. His redemption was anchored to press cooperation. To break it now meant exposure. To the world, to his sons, to history. A heated argument erupted between mother and son, words heavy with decades of restraint. "You've invited them in," she said quietly, "and they will never leave." Camilla's newfound acceptance faced its first trial. A leaked letter, authentic or forged, circulated among reporters hinting at emotional manipulation and jealousy within her circle. The tabloids hesitated, unsure whether to print it. In secret, Charles pleaded with Hale's rivals to suppress the story. But Hale saw his chance. The people deserve the truth. he said publicly. Privately, he demanded something else. An invitation to Highgrove, direct access to the future king's household. When Charles refused, Hale's next front page carried a headline that struck the palace like thunder: "The Prince, the Press, and the Price of Silence." The fallout was immediate. Palace phones rang endlessly. Aides scrambled to contain the fire. Lawyers drafted letters, denials, and statements. Charles' team blamed Hale. Hale blamed sources. And the public devoured every word. The fragile illusion of control collapsed. Inside Clarence House, Charles sat motionless, listening to the quiet hiss of a disconnected phone line. The press he thought had mastered him, and though the headlines would fade, the damage would not. For the first time since Diana's death, the monarchy trembled, not from tragedy, but from truth. The tabloid storm raged for weeks. Though no direct proof of corruption surfaced, the whispers were enough. Charles' team convened emergency meetings, locked doors, shredded drafts. "If the story cannot be stopped," said Helen Price, "it must be smothered." A bold new strategy was born: openness as illusion. Charles would grant limited interviews, stage emotional appearances, and let cameras witness his human side. The aim was not truth. It was empathy. And in a Britain still aching for healing, empathy sold better than scandal. The interview aired across the nation, a masterpiece of controlled sincerity. Charles spoke softly, regret heavy in every pause. "One never stops grieving," he said, eyes lowered, words trembling just enough to be believable. The clip dominated headlines. Sympathy began to return. But while the public embraced his vulnerability, palace insiders knew better. Every phrase had been written by committee, every gesture rehearsed. The performance worked. Camilla's name was never mentioned, yet her absence spoke volumes. Redemption had been bought, once again, with silence. Behind the scenes, the machinery roared to life. Charles' aides planted stories of his charitable work. Architecture, environment, the arts. His schedule became a parade of compassion. And slowly, attention drifted from scandal to substance. Meanwhile, Camilla's image rehabilitation reached its climax. Her first semi-public appearance alongside Charles. The risk was immense. One wrong photo, one cruel headline could undo years of effort. But Charles insisted. "They will never accept her," warned Helen. "Then we'll teach them to," he replied. The photographs hit the morning papers like a slow explosion. "A new chapter," read one. Charles and Camilla step into the light. The tone had changed, from scandal to acceptance. It was the greatest media reversal in royal history, achieved through calculation and fatigue. The people were tired of hating, and Charles' team knew it. What no one realized was how fragile this new piece was. One editor still held proof of the old deal. A letter, a bank transfer, a note in Charles' own handwriting. Hale had kept it, waiting for the perfect moment. At Clarence House, Charles finally allowed himself a rare moment of calm. The headlines had softened. The nation's anger had waned. "We've turned the page," his aide whispered. But as he stared into the fire, Charles understood the truth. This peace was borrowed, not earned. Every silence had a source, every favor a debt. And debts like these never stay buried forever. Somewhere in the city, Hale still waited, with proof that could unravel everything. The monarchy's survival now depended not on faith, but on fear. The letter was real. Dated months after Diana's death, written in Charles' own hand, it confirmed a promise: exclusive coverage in exchange for fair treatment. Hale's paper had kept it hidden for years, waiting for leverage. Now, after being cut from royal circles, he prepared to publish. Rumors reached Clarence House within hours. Panic spread like fire. Aides worked overnight, making calls, issuing threats disguised as requests. Charles sat in silence as Helen read the contents aloud. His name, his words, undeniable. For the first time, there was no narrative to spin, no photograph to soften the blow. The truth had weight now, and it was moving toward daylight. Richard Hale knew what he held. The letter was his insurance, his revenge, his legacy. "They think they own the story," he told a colleague. "I'm just giving it back to the people." But power rarely forgives betrayal. The palace struck first. Quietly, they leaked rumors of Hale's misconduct, his drinking, his debts. Within days, his credibility began to unravel. Editors distanced themselves. His papers suspended him. He didn't care. He had already sent the letter to a rival outlet, sealed, time-stamped, waiting for release. The game had changed. The monarchy's silence was now a race against time. The Queen's private secretary demanded answers. "How deep does it go?" he asked Charles' aides. No one could answer. Every layer of the deal, press leaks, favors, payments, was tangled beyond tracing. The palace was no longer controlling the press. It was surviving it. Charles, exhausted and hollow, admitted what no heir should ever say. It was either this or the end of me. Silence filled the room. The Queen, upon hearing his words, reportedly turned away. The institution she had guarded for half a century had traded truth for convenience, and it was now eating itself alive. Days before publication, the rival paper's editor received an unexpected visitor, Helen Price. She came without security, carrying only a folder. Inside were private photographs, notes and communications proving the royal family's charitable work and devotion, evidence designed to counterbalance Hale's exposé. "Print both," she said quietly. "Let the people decide which story they believe." It was a dangerous gamble, acknowledging the deal by drowning it in sentiment. The editor hesitated, torn between duty and spectacle. But he knew one thing: truth rarely sells, as well as redemption. On Sunday morning, the papers hit the stands. 2 stories, side by side. One exposed the secret bargain, letters, sources, and timelines. The other painted Charles as the misunderstood reformer, a man haunted by tragedy, but guided by purpose. The nation was divided. Some saw deceit, others saw desperation. In the chaos of public debate, the truth blurred again, buried under noise and emotion. By nightfall, Hale's career was over, his credibility destroyed, but the deal he exposed remained officially unsubstantiated. The silence had survived, not by force, but by fatigue. The leak left scars that no headline could heal. Though the palace had outlasted the storm, every relationship now felt poisoned. Reporters once loyal now feared exposure. Aides whispered in corridors, afraid of listening ears. Charles' inner circle met in silence, a handful of loyalists around a single table. "We've been reactive too long," said Helen Price. "It's time we take control." The new strategy was ruthless. Use the press to destroy the press. Feed rival outlets crumbs of scandal about others, ensuring Charles remained the calm center of chaos. Reputation, by contrast, it was the birth of a quieter, darker campaign. Over the following months, the new operation unfolded with surgical precision. Friendly journalists received whispers of minor royal scandals, never about Charles, always about distant cousins or lesser courtiers. Editors loved it. The public devoured it. Distraction became protection. Each small fire drew eyes away from the source. Camilla's image softened further, now cast as the quiet strength beside a wounded man. And Charles, though haunted, began to see the irony. He had become the architect of the same manipulation he once feared. Inside the palace, the Queen watched the transformation with quiet dismay. The monarchy had always endured by restraint. Now, it survived by manipulation. "You've learned the wrong lessons," she told her son. But Charles was unshakable. "I've learned what survival costs," he replied. To him, Reputation was no longer about honor. It was about endurance. He had outlived public hatred, scandal, and loss. The truth, however, was a different kind of ghost, one that lingered in every photo, every calculated smile. Hale's disappearance from public life didn't stop the whispers. Other journalists began searching, piecing together the fragments he left behind. Charles's aides responded swiftly, planting positive stories before questions could form. "Noise kills curiosity," Helen said. Her theory proved right. Each week brought another royal project, another exclusive photo, another carefully timed leak. The press machine that once preyed on them now fed from their hand. But for every headline bought, another debt deepened. The crown was no longer hiding from the media. It was funding it. As 2002 approached, Charles began to sense the quiet power of invisibility. The more he controlled the narrative, the less real he became. Public affection returned in waves, measured, cautious, but genuine. Yet within his own staff, exhaustion took root. Some questioned the ethics, others simply feared discovery. Helen Price, once his fiercest defender, began to waver. "We've become what we despised," she whispered, but Charles didn't answer. His reflection in the dark window said enough. For survival, there had been a deal. Now, there was a system. And systems don't confess, they adapt. Years had passed since the storm. Britain had changed, but the royal corridors remained the same. Polished floors, muffled whispers, portraits that never blinked. The prince had aged into calm authority, admired yet unknowable. His reputation had survived, his legacy curated to precision. But late at night, when the palace halls fell silent, the echoes of old secrets stirred again. New journalists were rising, young, fearless, digital. They cared little for the old rules of access and loyalty. "Shortly, key reign. They don't fear the crown," murmured Helen, now gray at the temples. "And they don't want its favor. The system that once shielded them was fading with the ink that had built it." Outside the palace, a new storm gathered, not from scandal, but from scrutiny. Leaked archives from decades past hinted at arrangements between the monarchy and the press, long buried, but never erased. Alaric's advisors urged denial, but Helen hesitated. "We can't outpace the truth forever," she said softly. "Then we'll redefine it," he answered. A plan took form. To release his own memoir, a confession framed as reflection. By owning the narrative, he would control it once more. It was a gamble rooted in the same instinct that began everything: survival through storytelling. When the memoir was released, it swept across the nation like a confession dressed in poetry. Alaric wrote of duty, loss, and regret, but never names. Readers wept. Commentators praised his honesty. And yet, between the lines, those who knew saw the truth he hadn't spoken. That reputation once bartered can never be wholly reclaimed. For every page of humility, there was a paragraph of omission. He had turned his past into a parable, one the public could forgive because it felt human. The silence had evolved again, finding sanctuary in words. Helen retired soon after the book's release. On her last day, she walked the empty corridors of the palace, hearing echoes of the first meetings. Voices planning narratives, trading favors, justifying the unspoken. She paused by a window overlooking the courtyard. "We thought we were protecting him," she whispered. "But maybe we were protecting ourselves." The truth had become too tangled to untie, too old to punish. The institution endured, not because it was pure, but because people preferred its illusion to its absence. That night, Alaric sat by the fire, his reflection fractured across the glass of a half-empty tumbler. Beyond the palace walls, screens glowed with stories, some praising, some probing, all endless. He smiled faintly. The world no longer believed in silence. It believed in spectacle. And perhaps that was the final victory. Not to erase the past, but to bury it beneath 1,000 newer headlines. The fire crackled, soft and forgiving. Tomorrow would bring another story, another version of the truth. And as always, he would let it be written.